Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 2 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 2. Let's take a look at question number 41. We are working with availability zones here. First, let's review the situation. A company wants to deploy virtual machines with high availability to ensure their mission-critical application survives a localized power outage or fire destroying a single facility in a given region. Which type of failure does an Azure availability zone primarily protect against? Let's compare the available options. Option A is an entire Azure region failure. Option B is a single server rack failure within a cluster. Option C is an entire Azure data center failure. Option D is a software bug causing a storage drive crash. The best choice is option C, an entire Azure data center failure. Here's why. Availability zones are unique physical locations within an Azure region. Each zone is made up of one or more data centers equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking. This protects applications from the failure of a single data center facility. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Region failures require disaster recovery strategies like region pairs or multi-region deployments, not availability zones, which operate within a single region. B. Single rack failures are protected against by availability sets, which distribute virtual machines across fault domains inside a single data center. D. Availability zones provide physical separation. They do not inherently prevent software bugs or single disk crashes inside a running operating system. A helpful shortcut is this. Availability sets protect against hardware failures within a data center, racks servers, while availability zones protect against the failure of an entire data center facility. Question number 42. Consider this situation. Your organization manages a diverse IT footprint that includes Kubernetes clusters hosted on a competing cloud provider and physical Linux servers located in your local data center. You need a unified service to extend Azure governance, monitoring, and security policies to these external resources. Which Azure service should you implement? Review the options. Option A, Azure Policy. Option B, Azure Arc. Option C, Azure Front Door. Option D, Microsoft Entra Connect. The right response is option B, Azure Arc. The main reason is Azure Arc extends the Azure Resource Manager (ARM) management plane to external environments, enabling you to project on-premises physical servers, multi-cloud virtual machines, and Kubernetes clusters into Azure for unified compliance and monitoring. Now let's rule out the other options. A. While Azure Policy is used to evaluate compliance, it cannot natively reach outside of Azure without Azure Arc acting as the bridge for those external resources. C. Azure Front Door is a global content delivery network and load balancer, completely unrelated to server management and compliance. D. Microsoft Entra Connect synchronizes on-premises Active Directory identities with the cloud. It does not govern or monitor external servers. Whenever a scenario involves extending Azure management, policies, or monitoring tools to servers and clusters located outside of Microsoft Azure, Azure Arc is the answer. See how you handle question number 43. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. A web application is hosted on several Azure virtual machines within a virtual network. You must enforce a security rule that restricts inbound traffic from the public internet, allowing only HTTPS port 443 and blocking all other ports. Which Azure resource should you configure to filter this network traffic? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Next, option A. An Azure Key Vault. Next, option B. A Network Security Group, NSG. Next, option C. Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. Next, option D. A Microsoft Entra Security Group. Go with option B. A Network Security Group, NSG. A Network Security Group, NSG, acts as a basic firewall for your virtual networks. It contains security rules that allow or deny inbound and outbound network traffic based on source, destination, port, and protocol. The other choices do not work because A. Azure Key Vault is used to securely store secrets, passwords, and certificates, not to filter network traffic. C. Azure RBAC manages authorization and access to Azure resources via the control plane, not network traffic flows on the data plane. D. A Microsoft Entra Security Group is an identity construct used to manage user permissions, not a network firewall. Exam tip. Network Security Groups, NSGs, are the primary mechanism for implementing simple Layer 3/4 firewall rules to allow or deny traffic to Azure virtual machines and subnets. Now let's examine question number 44. Next, let's move into Azure Service Health. Let's start with the scenario. You have several virtual machines deployed in the West Europe region. You need to view active service incidents, planned maintenance events, and health advisories that could impact your specific resources in this region. Which Azure monitoring feature provides this personalized dashboard? Here are the possible answers. Choice A. Azure Advisor. Choice B. Azure Service Health. Choice C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Choice D. Azure App Service. In this case, choose option B. Azure Service Health. This works because Azure Service Health provides a personalized view of the health of the Azure services and regions you are actively using. It alerts you to provider-side issues, planned maintenance, and health advisories that specifically impact your deployed resources. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A. Azure Advisor provides recommendations for cost, security, and performance optimizations, but it does not track live regional outages or planned maintenance events. C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud focuses on security posture and threat protection, not infrastructure maintenance or service outages. D. Azure App Service is a PaaS hosting environment for web apps, not a monitoring dashboard for regional health. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure Service Health is personalized to your environment and shows issues affecting your specific resources, whereas the Azure Status page shows global outages affecting the entire Azure platform. Let's continue with question number 45. Here's the situation to consider. Your company's primary database deployed in Azure experiences significant downtime that violates the guaranteed availability outlined in the Microsoft Service Level Agreement, SLA. How does Microsoft typically compensate customers for an SLA breach? Now let's review the options. Choice A. By issuing service credits to the Azure account. Choice B. By refunding the original payment method. Choice C. By automatically migrating the resource to a different cloud region. Choice D. By providing a discount code for future resource deployments. The answer here is option A. By issuing service credits to the Azure account. Let's look at the reasoning. If an Azure service does not meet its service level agreement, an eligible customer may receive a service credit according to the service-specific SLA terms. The customer must follow the applicable claim process and deadlines. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, SLA remedies are normally provided as service credits, not direct cash refunds to the original payment method. C, an SLA breach does not automatically migrate a resource to another region. D, Microsoft uses SLA-defined service credits rather than promotional discount codes. Keep this point in mind for the exam. An Azure SLA defines an availability commitment and the service credit remedy that may apply when the commitment is not met. Let's work through question number 46. Take a moment to review this scenario. Your organization is adopting Microsoft Entra ID as its cloud-based identity and access service. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Microsoft Entra ID requires you to deploy and manage domain controller virtual machines in Azure. Statement 2. Microsoft Entra ID provides authentication for Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365. Statement 3. Microsoft Entra ID supports single sign-on to Microsoft Cloud Services and many third-party applications. Statement 1 should be marked no. Microsoft operates the cloud directory infrastructure. Customers do not deploy domain controllers for Microsoft Entra ID. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Both services use Microsoft Entra ID for cloud identity and authentication. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Microsoft Entra ID can provide one identity and sign-in experience across integrated applications. The main takeaway is Microsoft Entra ID is cloud identity and access management. Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides managed domain features such as domain join and LDAP. Question number 47 brings in a useful concept. Let's focus on the following scenario. An administrator writes an automation script that uses Azure PowerShell templates to provision resource groups and virtual machines. Which three environments can execute the Azure PowerShell script? Select exactly three answers. Watch the differences between these options. Option A. A Linux workstation with PowerShell and the Azure PowerShell as module installed. Option B. A Windows 11 workstation with the Azure PowerShell as module installed. Option C. A web browser using the PowerShell environment in Azure Cloud Shell. Option D. A macOS workstation with only the Azure CLI installed. Option E. A Windows 10 workstation with only the Azure CLI installed. The answers that work here are Option A. A Linux workstation with PowerShell and the Azure PowerShell as module installed. Option B. A Windows 11 workstation with the Azure PowerShell as module installed. And Option C. A web browser using the PowerShell environment in Azure Cloud Shell. This is the best choice because Azure PowerShell is cross-platform when PowerShell and the as module are installed. Azure Cloud Shell also provides a browser-based PowerShell environment with Azure tools available. D. The Azure CLI uses as commands and does not by itself execute Azure PowerShell templates. E. Installing only the Azure CLI does not provide the Azure PowerShell as module required by the script. A helpful shortcut is this. Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell are separate cross-platform tools. Azure Cloud Shell provides both through a browser. Here comes question number 48. A manufacturing company wants to cache frequently accessed documents on local Windows servers in their factories while keeping the master copies safely backed up in the cloud. They plan to implement Azure File Sync to achieve this. Which Azure storage service acts as the cloud endpoint for Azure File Sync? Here are the options. Choice A, Azure Table Storage. Choice B, Azure Blob Storage. Choice C, Azure Files. Choice D, Azure Queue Storage. The answer here is option C, Azure Files. Here's why. Azure File Sync allows you to centralize your organization's file shares in Azure Files while keeping the flexibility, performance, and compatibility of an on-premises Windows file server. Azure Files provides the cloud-based SMB shares used as the sync endpoint. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Azure Table Storage stores no SQL structured data, not file shares or directory structures. B. While blob storage holds massive amounts of unstructured object data, Azure File Sync specifically integrates with Azure Files to maintain SMB share structures and NTFS permissions. D. Azure Queue Storage is used for asynchronous message queuing between application components, completely unrelated to file synchronization. Azure File Sync transforms an on-premises Windows server into a quick cache of an Azure file share located in Azure Files. Now let's examine question number 49. We are moving on to shared responsibility. First, let's review the situation. A company is comparing how much of the technology stack it must manage under different cloud service models. Arrange the cloud service models from the highest level of customer management responsibility to the lowest. These are the steps you need to order. The first available item is Software as a Service, SaaS. The second available item is Platform as a Service, PaaS. The third available item is Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Here's the correct sequence. The first step is Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. The second step is Platform as a Service, PaaS. The third step is Software as a Service, SaaS. The main reason is IaaS leaves the customer responsible for the guest operating system, applications, and data. PaaS transfers operating system and platform management to the provider. SaaS provides a completed application and requires the least customer management. Exam tip. Customer management responsibility decreases as you move from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS. Now for question number 50. Here's what is happening. You need to ensure that a critical production database in your Azure environment is not accidentally deleted by any administrator, even if they have full contributor permissions on the subscription. Which Azure governance feature should you apply directly to the database resource to prevent deletion? Choice A. A resource lock. Choice B. An Azure policy definition. Choice C. A management group. Choice D. A network security group, NSG. The best choice is option A. A resource lock. Resource locks, cannot delete or read only, can be applied to subscriptions, resource groups, or individual resources. A cannot delete lock ensures that authorized users can still read and modify a resource, but they cannot delete it without first removing the lock. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Azure policy enforces rules and effects for resource properties to maintain compliance, but resource locks are the specific tool used to block the accidental deletion of an existing resource. C. A management group is a logical container used to manage access and policies across multiple subscriptions, not a mechanism to prevent resource deletion directly. D. A network security group, NSG, is a basic firewall used to control network traffic flow, completely unrelated to resource management locks. Here's a useful exam tip. Resource locks override RBAC permissions. Even if a user is an owner, they cannot delete a resource if a cannot delete lock is applied to it. Let's continue with question number 51. The focus now shifts to log analytics. Take a moment to review this scenario. Your operations team is configuring diagnostic settings to collect detailed performance metrics and event logs from multiple Azure virtual machines and web apps using Azure Monitor. Where does Azure Monitor primarily store this centralized log data so it can be queried and analyzed? Take a look at each choice. Option A is a log analytics workspace. Option B is an Azure SQL database. Option C is an Azure Blob Storage Container. Option D is an Azure Service Bus Queue. The right response is option A. A log analytics workspace. This works because a log analytics workspace is the logical storage environment where Azure Monitor collects and aggregates log data. Once stored in the workspace, the data can be analyzed and queried using the Custo query language, KQL. The other choices do not work because B, Azure SQL database, is a relational database for transactional data, not the native telemetry storage backend for Azure Monitor. C, while logs can be archived to Azure Blob Storage for long-term retention, the primary location where Azure Monitor stores logs for active querying is a log analytics workspace. D. Azure Service Bus is a messaging broker for decoupling application components, not a storage repository for operational logs. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Anytime you need to query logs, build dashboards from telemetry, or create log-based alerts in Azure Monitor, the underlying data repository is a log analytics workspace. Let's take a look at question number 52. Here's the situation to consider. A company is migrating its physical data centers to Azure virtual machines using an infrastructure as a service (IaaS) model. Under the shared responsibility model, which two tasks are strictly the responsibility of the cloud provider, Microsoft, in an IaaS environment? You need to identify two correct options. Let's compare the available options. Option A is applying security patches to the guest operating system. Option B is managing the physical security of the data center facilities. Option C is maintaining and replacing failed physical host hardware. Option D is configuring inbound firewall rules for the virtual network. Option E is managing user identities and access policies. You should choose option B, managing the physical security of the data center facilities, and option C, maintaining and replacing failed physical host hardware. Let's look at the reasoning. In an infrastructure as a service (IaaS) model, the cloud provider assumes responsibility for all the physical underlying infrastructure. This includes data center security, power, cooling, network cabling, and replacing physical servers and hypervisors. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. A. In IaaS, like an Azure VM, patching the guest operating system is entirely the customer's responsibility. D. Configuring network security groups and virtual network firewalls is the customer's responsibility in an IaaS model. E. Identity and access management remains the customer's responsibility across all cloud models, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. The main takeaway is in IaaS, the cloud provider stops at the hypervisor. Everything above the hypervisor, OS, network configuration, data, identities, is managed by the customer. Next up is question number 53. Here's the scenario. An application architecture is upgraded from a design that maxes out at 5 simultaneous compute instances to a new distributed design that can dynamically expand to support up to 20 instances during peak traffic. Which cloud computing benefit does this higher capacity limit primarily demonstrate? The choices are: Option A, predictability. Option B, scalability. Option C, high availability. Option D, security. Go with option B, scalability. This is the best choice because scalability is the ability to increase or decrease resources to accommodate fluctuating workload demands. An architecture that supports a higher maximum instance count is fundamentally more scalable than one with a lower limit. The remaining options can be eliminated because A. Predictability refers to consistent performance and cost forecasting, not the ability to increase raw capacity limits. C. High availability ensures the application remains online during a localized failure, which is distinct from scaling out to handle increased user load. D. Security involves protecting data and infrastructure from threats, completely unrelated to computing capacity limits. A helpful shortcut is this: scaling out, adding more instances, or scaling up, adding more CPU RAM, are the two primary methods of achieving scalability in the cloud. Question number 54. Needs a little extra thought. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. A new cloud administrator needs a centralized, web-based graphical interface to create and manage Azure virtual networks, storage accounts, and web apps. Which Azure management tool should the administrator use? Compare each option with the requirement. Consider option A, Azure Portal. Consider option B, Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Consider option C, Azure Cloud Shell. Consider option D, an Azure Resource Manager template. In this case, choose option A, Azure Portal. Here's why. The Azure Portal is the browser-based graphical management interface for creating, configuring, and monitoring Azure resources and subscriptions. B. The Microsoft 365 Admin Center manages Microsoft 365 services rather than general Azure infrastructure. C. Azure Cloud Shell is a browser-based command-line environment, not the primary graphical interface. D. An ARM template is an infrastructure as code definition used for repeatable deployments, not an interactive graphical console. Use the Azure Portal for graphical management, Cloud Shell for browser-based commands, and ARM templates for repeatable infrastructure as code deployments. Take a careful look at question number 55. This question takes us into Azure Virtual Desktop. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. Your company needs to provide employees with remote access to a cloud-hosted Windows 11 environment that includes Microsoft 365 apps. Employees must be able to connect from various personal devices worldwide. Which Azure service natively provides this desktop and application virtualization capability? See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A, Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets. Next, option B, Azure Virtual Desktop. Next, option C, Azure App Service. Next, option D, Azure Container Instances. In this case, choose option B, Azure Virtual Desktop. The main reason is Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, is a comprehensive desktop and app virtualization service running in the cloud. It is the only service that delivers simplified management and Windows 10 11's multi-session capabilities natively. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Virtual machine scale sets are used to deploy and manage a group of identical, load-balanced virtual machines for compute workloads, not for providing managed end-user remote desktops. C. Azure App Service is a PaaS offering used to host web applications and REST APIs, not virtual desktop environments. D. Container instances run isolated application containers without managing underlying virtual machines. They do not provide virtualized Windows desktop experiences. Exam tip. When you see requirements for remote work, cloud-hosted Windows desktops, or Windows multi-session, the answer is Azure Virtual Desktop. Question number 56. Needs a little extra thought. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. An IT team is standardizing Azure management tools across Windows, Linux, and macOS devices. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, you can install and run Azure PowerShell on macOS. The second statement says, you can install and run the Azure CLI on Linux. The third statement says, Azure Cloud Shell requires a local management agent before it can be used. The first statement is yes. PowerShell and the Azure PowerShell as module support macOS. The second statement is yes. The Azure CLI supports Linux, Windows, and macOS. The third statement is no. Cloud Shell is a browser-accessible, Microsoft-hosted shell and requires no local agent. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell can run locally across major operating systems, while Cloud Shell runs in the browser. Now for question number 57. Here's the scenario. A company wants to host a web application in Azure without managing the underlying operating system or web server patches. The platform should support built-in scaling for the application. Which Azure service is the most appropriate hosting option? Review the options. Choice A. Azure App Service. Choice B. Azure Virtual Machines. Choice C. Azure Virtual Desktop. Choice D. Azure VPN Gateway. The answer here is option A. Azure App Service. Azure App Service is a platform as a service offering for hosting web applications and APIs. Microsoft manages the underlying operating system and platform, while the customer deploys and manages the application. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Azure Virtual Machines require the customer to manage the guest operating system and web server software. C. Azure Virtual Desktop provides virtualized desktops and applications for end users. D. Azure VPN Gateway provides encrypted network connectivity and does not host web applications. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Choose App Service for managed web app hosting, containers for packaged applications, and virtual machines when operating system control is required. Let's work through question number 58. This is marked as an easy question. Let's start with the scenario. You are preparing to provision a new Azure virtual machine to host a proprietary application for your organization. At a minimum, which logical container is required to hold this new virtual machine resource? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, a resource group. Choice B, a management group. Choice C, an Azure storage account. Choice D, a virtual network subnet. The best choice is option A. A resource group. This works because a resource group is a logical container into which Azure resources like web apps, databases, and virtual machines are deployed and managed. Every resource must exist in exactly one resource group. The other choices do not work because B. Management groups contain subscriptions to manage governance at scale. They do not hold individual resources directly. C. A storage account holds data objects, blobs, files, queues. It does not act as a management container for a virtual machine resource. D. While a VM connects to a virtual network subnet for communication, the VM resource itself is administratively housed in a resource group. The main takeaway is you cannot create an Azure resource without assigning it to a resource group. Let's work through question number 59. First, let's review the situation. You want to check for any ongoing global outages affecting Azure regions before deploying a critical workload. You do not want to authenticate and sign into the Azure portal to view this information. Which page provides a public, global view of the health of all Azure services and regions? Now let's review the options. Choice A. Azure status. Choice B. Azure service health. Choice C. Azure resource health. Choice D. Azure monitor alerts. The right response is option A. Azure status. Let's look at the reasoning. The Azure status page, status.azure.com, provides a global view of the health of all Azure services across all Azure regions. It is a public page that does not require authentication and is used to track widespread platform outages. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Azure Service Health requires authentication and provides a personalized dashboard showing only the issues affecting your specific deployed resources and regions. C. Azure Resource Health provides information about the health of individual resources, like a specific VM restarting, inside the authenticated portal. D. Azure Monitor alerts trigger notifications based on custom metrics or logs within your environment. They are not a public global health dashboard. A helpful shortcut is this. Azure Status provides a public, unauthenticated global view of major outages. Azure Service Health provides a private, authenticated view of issues affecting your specific deployments. Now let's examine question number 60. Here's the situation to consider. An IT compliance manager is documenting responsibilities for the company's cloud deployments. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. In a platform as a service, PaaS, model, the customer installs security patches on the underlying operating system. Now check statement 2. In an infrastructure as a service, IaaS, model, Microsoft manages the physical data center network. Now check statement 3. In a software as a service, SaaS, model, customer data and user identities are shared responsibilities between the customer and Microsoft. For statement 1, choose no. Microsoft manages and patches the operating system in PaaS. For statement 2, choose yes. Microsoft manages the routers, switches, cabling, and other physical network infrastructure. For statement 3, choose no. The customer remains responsible for customer data, identities, users, and access configuration in SaaS. Customers always retain responsibility for their data, user accounts, and access controls. Microsoft always secures the physical cloud infrastructure. Here's an important one, question number 61. Next, let's move into scalability. The key situation is this. A web application is experiencing rapid growth, and the engineering team is evaluating different scaling methods. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, upgrading a virtual machine's CPU and RAM to a more powerful tier is horizontal scaling. The second statement says, adding virtual machine instances to a cluster to handle more traffic is horizontal scaling. The third statement says, horizontal scaling can be triggered automatically based on performance metrics. The answer here is no. Increasing the capacity of one instance is vertical scaling or scaling up. The answer here is yes. Adding instances is horizontal scaling or scaling out. The answer here is yes. Autoscale rules can change the instance count when configured metric thresholds are reached. Exam tip. Scale up changes instance size, scale out changes instance count. Let's take a look at question number 62. Take a moment to review this scenario. You are investigating a connectivity issue with your Azure resources. You need a personalized dashboard within the Azure portal that displays active service issues, planned maintenance events, and health advisories relevant specifically to the regions and services you use. Which Azure service provides this personalized information? Take a look at each choice. Option A is Azure Service Health. Option B is Azure Advisor. Option C is Azure Monitor Log Analytics. Option D is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Go with option A, Azure Service Health. This is the best choice because Azure Service Health is a personalized dashboard that provides guidance and support when issues in Azure services affect you. It filters the noise of global outages to show only the incidents and maintenance that impact your subscriptions and resources. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, Azure Advisor evaluates your deployed resources and offers best practice recommendations for cost, security, and performance. It does not track live regional outages. C, Log Analytics is a tool used to write queries and analyze collected telemetry data, not a curated dashboard of Azure Platform Health events. D, Defender for Cloud provides security posture management and threat protection, not operational platform health tracking. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure Service Health helps you understand if a problem you are experiencing is caused by a localized issue on your end or an ongoing outage on Microsoft's end affecting your region. See how you handle question number 63. We are moving on to storage accounts. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. A cloud engineer is designing a naming convention for Azure storage accounts. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. An Azure storage account name must be globally unique across Azure. Now check statement 2. Two storage accounts can use the same name if they are in different Azure regions. Now check statement 3. Two storage accounts can use the same name if they are in different Azure subscriptions. The first statement is yes. The name creates a globally addressable Azure storage namespace. The second statement is no. Regional separation does not remove the global uniqueness requirement. The third statement is no. Subscription boundaries do not allow duplicate storage account names. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Storage account names are globally unique because they are used in service endpoints. Let's continue with question number 64. Let's start with the scenario. Your organization relies heavily on Microsoft 365, a software as a service (SaaS) solution for corporate email and collaboration. Under the shared responsibility model, which component remains entirely the responsibility of your organization when using a SaaS solution? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, Information and Data Governance. Choice B, Application Feature Updates. Choice C, Underlying Operating System Patching. Choice D, Physical Data Center Security. The right response is option A, Information and Data Governance. Here's why. Customers always retain responsibility for their data, including classification, protection decisions, and compliance with data governance requirements. In SaaS, Microsoft manages the application platform, operating system, and physical infrastructure. B. The SaaS provider manages application feature updates. C. The SaaS provider patches the underlying operating system. D. Microsoft manages physical data center security for Azure cloud services. The main takeaway is in every cloud service model, the customer remains responsible for customer data, user accounts, and access configuration. Next up is question number 65. Consider this situation. You are configuring a data lifecycle policy for an Azure Blob Storage account. You need to assign an access tier for backup files that will be accessed infrequently but must be available immediately without delay when a restore is required. What is a characteristic of the cool access tier? Here are the options. Option A. It is optimized for data that is accessed infrequently and stored for at least 30 days. Option B. It stores data offline and requires a rehydration period of several hours before the data can be read. Option C. It provides the lowest data access costs but the highest storage capacity costs. Option D. It is the default tier automatically applied to all new storage accounts and cannot be changed. In this case, choose option A. It is optimized for data that is accessed infrequently and stored for at least 30 days. The main reason is the cool access tier has lower storage costs and higher access costs compared to hot storage. It is designed for data that will remain stored for at least 30 days and is infrequently accessed, but it remains online for immediate retrieval. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. This describes the archive tier, which is offline and requires rehydration. The cool tier is online. C. This describes the hot tier, which has high storage costs but cheap data access transaction costs. D. The default tier can be set to either hot or cool when creating a storage account, and it can be changed later. A helpful shortcut is this. Cool tier is for short-term backups or infrequently accessed data, 30 days. Archive tier is for long-term retention and compliance data, 180 days, that can tolerate retrieval delays. Let's focus on question number 66. This situation sets up the main requirement. You are deploying a highly available legacy architecture that does not support availability zones. You need to ensure that the virtual machines are distributed across multiple racks within the same data center so they do not share the same power source or network switch. Which Azure Compute feature provides this logical grouping using fault domains and update domains? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A, availability sets. Now examine choice B, Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets. Now examine choice C, Azure Load Balancer. Now examine choice D, availability zones. The answer here is option A, availability sets. Availability sets are a logical grouping capability that ensures VM resources placed within them are isolated from each other when they are deployed within an Azure data center. They use fault domains, different racks power, and update domains, staggered reboot schedules to provide high availability. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Virtual machine scale sets are used for automatically scaling identical virtual machines in and out based on demand, though they can leverage availability sets zones underlyingly. C. An Azure load balancer distributes incoming network traffic across a group of backend resources. It does not dictate physical rack placement. D. Availability zones protect against entire data center failures by placing resources in completely separate facilities, which the scenario explicitly rules out. Fault domains protect against hardware failure, power network, and update domains protect against software updates. Both are the core components of an availability set. Let's take a look at question number 67. The focus now shifts to Azure subscriptions. Here's the situation to consider. A large enterprise has independent business units. Each unit needs its own Azure resource and billing boundary so that its consumption can be tracked and managed separately. Which Azure structural component should be created for each business unit? Take a look at each choice. Option A is an Azure subscription. Option B is an Azure Management Group. Option C is an Azure Resource Group. Option D is an Azure Policy Initiative. The best choice is option A, an Azure subscription. This works because an Azure subscription is a boundary for deploying, managing, and tracking the cost of Azure resources. Separate subscriptions let business units manage resource usage and cost allocation independently. The other choices do not work because B, a management group organizes multiple subscriptions for governance. C, a resource group organizes resources within a subscription but is not a separate subscription-level billing boundary. D, an Azure Policy Initiative groups policy definitions for compliance and does not create a billing boundary. Exam tip. Resources belong to resource groups belong to subscriptions, and subscriptions can be organized under management groups. Take a careful look at question number 68. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. You need to run Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell commands from a web browser without installing management tools on your local computer. Which Azure tool should you use? Compare each option with the requirement. Consider option A, Azure Cloud Shell. Consider option B, Azure Advisor. Consider option C, Azure Service Health. Consider option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Go with option A, Azure Cloud Shell. Let's look at the reasoning. Azure Cloud Shell is an authenticated, browser-accessible command-line environment for managing Azure resources. It includes Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell tools without requiring a local installation. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations. C. Azure Service Health reports service issues, planned maintenance, and advisories. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses and improves security posture. Here's a useful exam tip. Use Azure Cloud Shell when you need Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell from a browser without installing local tools. Question number 69. This question takes us into resource logs. Your team uses an Azure storage account for compliance logs. Administrators must be able to modify the storage account and add new containers, but the storage account resource itself must not be accidentally deleted. Which governance feature should you apply to the storage account? The choices are: Option A. A delete, cannot delete, resource lock. Option B. A read-only resource lock. Option C. An Azure management group. Option D. Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels. The best choice is option A. A delete, cannot delete, resource lock. This is the best choice because a delete, or cannot delete, lock prevents deletion of the storage account resource while still allowing authorized modifications. It therefore meets the requirement to keep the account configurable. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. A read-only lock blocks both deletion and management plane modifications. C. A management group organizes subscriptions and does not protect an individual resource from deletion. D. Microsoft Purview sensitivity labels classify and protect information. They do not prevent deletion of an Azure resource. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Resource locks protect management plane resources. Locking a storage account does not prevent containers or blobs inside it from being deleted or overwritten. Question number 70. Scenario. You are traveling without your corporate laptop. You need to run an emergency Azure CLI script to restart several services. You borrow a secure kiosk computer that does not have any administrative tools or SDKs installed. How can you access Azure Cloud Shell to run the script without installing local software? Option A. By opening a standard web browser and navigating to the Azure portal. Option B. By installing the Azure PowerShell module from the PowerShell gallery. Option C. By downloading the Azure Resource Manager (ARM) thick client. Option D. By using a local Windows command prompt session. The right response is option A. By opening a standard web browser and navigating to the Azure portal. Here's why. Azure Cloud Shell is an interactive, authenticated, browser-accessible shell for managing Azure resources. Because it is hosted in the cloud, it requires zero local installation and can be accessed securely from any modern web browser via the Azure portal. B. The scenario states the kiosk computer cannot have administrative tools installed, making local module installation impossible. C. There is no native ARM thick client. Management is done via CLI, PowerShell, SDKs, or the portal. D. A local Windows command prompt cannot execute Azure CLI scripts if the Azure CLI tools have not been installed on the host machine. The main takeaway is Azure Cloud Shell provides a pre-configured environment with all popular Azure management tools, CLI, PowerShell, Terraform, etc., already installed and updated, accessible directly from a browser. Here comes question number 71. Here's what is happening. A startup uses Azure App Service as a platform as a service, PaaS, offering for its web applications. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1, in PaaS, configuring the underlying physical data center network is the customer's responsibility. Statement 2, in PaaS, writing and deploying the application code is the customer's responsibility. Statement 3, in PaaS, managing users and configuring access controls is the customer's responsibility. For statement 1, choose no. Microsoft manages the physical network and data center infrastructure. For statement 2, choose yes. The customer develops, deploys, and configures the application running on the managed platform. For statement 3, choose yes. Customers manage user accounts, permissions, and access policies for their workloads. A helpful shortcut is this. PaaS removes operating system and platform maintenance, but the customer still manages applications, data, users, and access. Now let's examine question number 72. Next, let's move into Azure containers. Take a moment to review this scenario. A development team is comparing full virtual machines with lightweight container hosting. Match each compute description to the appropriate Azure service. First, review these entries. Left side choice 1 provides virtualized compute with a complete guest operating system that the customer manages. Left side choice 2 runs a container image without requiring the customer to manage a guest operating system. Here are the possible matches. Right option A, Azure Virtual Machines. Right option B, Azure Container Instances. Right option C, Azure Virtual Desktop. Let's review the completed pairs. Pair provides virtualized compute with a complete guest operating system that the customer manages and A, Azure Virtual Machines. Pair runs a container image without requiring the customer to manage a guest operating system and B, Azure Container Instances. The main reason is Azure Virtual Machines provide full guest operating systems. Azure Container Instances runs container images while abstracting the underlying host operating system from the customer. Virtual machines include a guest operating system. Containers package the application and dependencies while sharing host operating system capabilities. Next up is question number 73. Here's what is happening. A company is designing basic network segmentation and connectivity for Azure resources. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. An Azure Virtual Network provides a private network environment for Azure resources. Statement 2. A subnet divides a virtual network's address space into smaller network segments. Statement 3. Virtual network peering sends traffic between the connected virtual networks over the public internet. Statement 1 should be marked yes. A virtual network enables Azure resources to communicate securely with each other and connected networks. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Subnets organize and segment resources within a virtual network. Statement 3 should be marked no. Peered virtual network traffic stays on the Microsoft backbone. Exam tip. A virtual network is the private network boundary, subnets segment it, and peering connects virtual networks privately. See how you handle question number 74. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. Your company is closing a physical data center and needs to migrate dozens of legacy Windows Server workloads to Azure as quickly as possible. The applications cannot be rewritten or re-architected before the move. Which cloud service model best supports this lift and shift migration approach? See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Next, option B, Platform as a Service, PaaS. Next, option C, Software as a Service, SaaS. Next, option D, Database as a Service, DBaaS. In this case, choose option A, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, provides virtualized computing resources over the Internet. Because it gives you full control over the operating system, it is the ideal model for a lift and shift migration, allowing you to move legacy applications exactly as they run on premises without rewriting code. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. PaaS abstracts the operating system. Migrating to PaaS usually requires some level of application refactoring or architecture updates. C. SaaS replaces the application entirely with a vendor-managed solution. You cannot lift and shift custom legacy code into a SaaS model. D. The BaaS is a specific subset of PaaS for databases. It does not host full Windows Server workloads. Here's a useful exam tip. If an exam scenario involves lift and shift, migrating legacy applications without changes, or requiring full OS-level access, the answer is always IaaS, virtual machines. You have completed part 2 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.